St. Augustine lecture on the Gospel of John, Tractatus 5, chapter 1, verse 33 following. Since then John had accepted a baptism which may be properly called the baptism of John, but the Lord Jesus Christ would not give his baptism to any, not that no one should be baptized with the baptism of the Lord, but that the Lord himself should always baptize. That was done, that the Lord should baptize by means of servants. That is to say, those whom the servants of the Lord were to baptize, the Lord baptized, not they. For it is one thing to baptize in the capacity of a servant, another thing to baptize with power. For baptism derives its character from him through whose power it is given, not from him through whose ministry it is given. As was John, so was his baptism, the righteous baptism of a righteous man, but of a man who had received from the Lord that grace and so great grace, that he was worthy to be the forerunner of the judge, and to point him out with the finger, and to fulfill the saying of that prophecy, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, "Prepare you the way for the Lord." Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. As was the Lord, such was his baptism. The baptism of the Lord then was divine, because the Lord was divine. But the Lord Jesus Christ could, if he wished, have given power to one of his servants to give a baptism of his own, as it were, in his stead, and have transferred from himself the power of baptizing, and assigned it to one of his servants, and have given the same power to the baptism transferred to the servant as it had when bestowed by the Lord. This he would not do, in order that the hope of the baptized might be in him, by whom they acknowledge themselves to have been baptized. He would not, therefore, that the servant should place his hope in the servant. And therefore the apostle exclaimed, when he saw men wishing to place their hope in himself, "Was Paul crucified for you? Or were you baptized in the name of Paul?" 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 13. Paul then baptized as a servant, not as the power itself, but the Lord baptized as the power. Give heed, he was both able to give this power to his servants and unwilling. For if he had given this power to his servants, that is to say, that what belonged to the Lord should be theirs, there would have been as many baptisms as servants, so that, as we speak of the baptism of John, we should also have spoken of the baptism of Peter, the baptism of Paul, the baptism of James, the baptism of Thomas, of Matthew, of Bartholomew. For we spoke of that baptism as that of John. But perhaps someone objects and says, "Prove to us that the baptism was called the baptism of John." I will prove it from the very words of the truth himself when he asked the Jews, "The baptism of John, whence was it? From heaven or of men?" Matthew chapter 29, verse 25. Therefore, less as many baptisms should be spoken of as there are servants who received power from the Lord to baptize. The Lord kept to him the power of baptizing and gave to his servants the ministry. The servant says that he baptizes. He says so rightly, as the apostle says, "And I baptized also the household of Stephanas." Matthew chapter 3, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 16. But as a servant, therefore, if even he be bad, and he happened to have the ministration of baptism, and if men do not know him, but God knows him, God, who has kept the power to himself, permits baptism to be administered through him.